I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I wasn't always hard, closed off like a root cellar with the door nailed shut. There was a time I laughed easy, touched people's arms when I talked, left my curtains open so the light could find me. But that was before Thomas died. And after that, well, after that, I became someone else. January 1884. A Tuesday evening I remember because Tuesdays were the days Thomas used to bring firewood in from the North Stand, and every Tuesday since he'd been gone. The silence hit different, heavier, like the day itself remembered what it lost. I was kneeling by the stove, feeding it the last split log from the pile. My hands were raw, cracked across the knuckles, the skin so dry it bled when I made a fist. William was on the floor behind me, 2 years old, trying to stack kindling chips into a tower. He'd get 3 high, they'd tumble, and he'd look at me with this expression, jaw set, eyes narrow, offended by gravity itself that was so much like Thomas I had to look away sometimes. He had his father's stubbornness in that little body. Built his tower again, knocked it down again, didn't cry, just started over. The cabin groaned around us. Wind came through the north wall like it had an invitation. I'd stuffed rags in the gaps, old flour sacks, even a piece of Thomas's work shirt I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Didn't matter. Cold don't care about sentiment. It finds the cracks. 8 months since Thomas died. His horse hit black ice on the ridge road, threw him into the ravine. They brought him home on a board. I won't talk about that part. Not yet. What I will tell you is what he left me, 40 acres of frozen mud. A cabin that leaked in 3 places. A root cellar, half empty by October. And a son who'd never remember his father's voice. And I promised myself standing over that fresh grave with dirt still under my fingernails that I would carry it. All of it. Alone. Because if I couldn't, then what was any of it for Beckett Cole? The wealthiest rancher in the valley had sent supplies 3 times since October, and 3 times I'd hauled them back to his gate in a wheelbarrow with a crooked wheel. The town thought I was foolish. Mrs. Hadley at the general store said it right to my face. Pride don't keep a child warm. Geneva, you're being stubborn as a mule in a mud hole and twice as foolish. I told her I wasn't asking for opinions. She gave hers anyway. That's how small towns work. But here's the thing. I didn't send those crates back because I didn't need them. I sent them back because accepting them would mean Thomas left me with nothing. And if Thomas left me with nothing, then maybe I was nothing all along. That night, I touched William's forehead. Warm, but just sleep warmth. The good, soft heat of a child bundled close. I told myself we were fine. The stove hissed like it was keeping a secret. I should have listened. Here's what unsettled me about Beckett Cole, really unsettled me. Down in the part of my chest where I kept the things I didn't want to look at, he never argued. October, the first crate, flour, salt pork, a tin of coffee. I loaded it in the wheelbarrow and hauled it back to his gate. He came out, looked at the crate, looked at me those steady gray eyes, patient as winter, and he nodded. That was it. Just nodded. Like I'd told him the weather was cold and he was simply agreeing. November, firewood, good wood seasoned oak, split clean, the kind that burned slow and warm while my green pine smoked more than it heated. I wanted to keep it so bad my teeth ached, but I loaded it up and wheeled it back. He was on his porch mending a bridle, looked up, set down his work, walked to the gate and said, "Much obliged for bringing it back, Mrs. Hawkins." Like I'd returned something borrowed, like I'd done him a favor. December. A wool blanket thick, soft, smelling of cedar and something clean and a jar of honey with dried lavender tied to the neck. I held that blanket against my cheek for a minute, maybe longer. Then I folded it, put it back, and hauled it to his gate. His foreman Dawson met me, big man, kind eyes, hat pushed back. He looked at the crate and said, "Ma'am, you sure that there's good honey?" "I'm sure." He scratched his jaw. "Boss ain't gonna like it." "Your boss can do what he pleases with his charity. I don't need it." Dawson was quiet a moment, then, real soft, "I don't reckon it's charity." "Ma'am, I reckon it's just a man who notices things." I walked home fast that day, faster than I needed to. What I knew about Beckett Cole was what everyone knew: he'd come to the valley 15 years ago with 50 head of cattle and hands that weren't afraid of barbed wire. Built his fortune slow, honest, one season at a time. Never married. Quiet in town. Generous when it counted. The valley respected him. I'd seen him once at the feed store, tipping his hat to old Mrs. Pearson, who everybody else ignored, carrying her sacks to the wagon without being asked. And I'd looked away before he could catch me watching. I told myself his kindness was pity. Pity for the widow with the leaking roof and the thin child. Pity I could name and refuse and feel righteous about. But at night alone, William asleep, the dark pressing close, I admitted what frightened me. It wasn't his kindness. It was his patience. A man who argues. I can plant my feet against. A man who waits. What's he waiting for? I called it pity, because pity I could refuse. What I couldn't name, I couldn't fight. First week of February, William started coughing. Children cough. Every mother knows that. A little cough is just the body doing its housekeeping, clearing dust, clearing cold air. Nothing to fret over. But this one started deep, down in his chest, like something was settling in and unpacking its bags. Day 1. I brewed dried elderflower tea, cooled it, spooned it into his mouth. He fussed, screwed up that little face like I'd given him vinegar. But he swallowed. I laid an onion poultice on his chest, warm flannel over that, held him in the rocker by the stove and sang, something my mother used to hum when the nights were long. I don't remember the words. I remember it helped. Day 2. The cough thickened, rattled. I boiled water and held him over the steam. A blanket tinted over both our heads so the warm, wet air could find his lungs. He cried. I cried too. Quiet, where he couldn't feel it in my chest. Changed the poultice every hour. My hands smelled like onion and elderflower and fear. Fear has a smell you learn that the first time you sit with a sick child at 2 a.m. and feel it rising off your own skin like heat off a stove lid. I bargained. Talked to God like he was standing in the corner. You already took Thomas. You don't get to take William too. That ain't the deal. That was never the deal. I talked to the weather break. Just break for one day. Give me one warm day to ride for the doctor. I talked to Thomas in my head, the way I hadn't let myself since the funeral. You said I was the strongest woman you ever met. You said I could handle anything. Well, I'm handling it. I'm handling it. Day 3. His skin went dry. Paper dry, like autumn leaves that crumble when you touch them, and hot, not the good warm of a sleeping child. This was furnace heat, a heat that burned from the inside, that turned his cheeks bright and his eyes glassy and made his body go limp in my arms like a cloth doll. The elderflower wasn't touching it. The poultices were warm rags and nothing more. I tried cool cloths on his forehead, tried walking him, tried the steam again. Nothing. I sat in that rocker at midnight on the third night, my sun burning against my chest. And I knew, the way you know when a storm's coming before the sky changes. My mother's remedies had limits. Her mother's remedies before her had limits. My pride had limits too. The difference was, only one of those limits could kill my boy. I did the math 3 times because the first 2 times the answer was impossible, and I thought maybe I'd carried the numbers wrong. Dr. Harlan in Ridgewater, 20 miles east. Snow waist deep since the big storm. Drifts taller than a man in the coulees. Temperature hadn't climbed above 0 in a week. My mare Bess was 14 years old. Half lame in the left foreleg from a fence tangle last spring. Good horse. Honest horse. But 20 miles through that was like asking a barn cat to pull a plow. I saddled her anyway. Didn't think, just moved. Wrapped William in every blanket I owned. Strapped him to my chest with a shawl tied tight. And I rode into the dark. We made it 50 yards. The drifts took Bess to her chest at the tree line. She lunged, tried to push through God love her. She tried, but the snow sucked at her legs like something alive, and she was blowing hard, trembling, not from cold, from the impossible math of it. I turned her around, led her back to the barn, unsaddled her with hands that shook so bad I could barely work the cinch. William whimpered against my chest, his breath coming in short, hot puffs against my collarbone. And I stood in that barn doorway and looked across the valley. Beckett Cole's ranch house, half a mile south. Lit windows glowing warm and gold against all that white and black and cold. A man with strong horses. A man with money to bring a doctor from anywhere. A man I'd pushed away 3 times. Every refusal stood between me and those lights. Every returned crate, every stiff jaw. Every time I'd chosen my pride over my son's safety, they lined up in the snow like fence posts, daring me to climb through. I climbed through that walk, half a mile through hip-deep snow in the dark. William burning against my chest, my legs numb to the thigh after the first 100 yards. The cold didn't just touch my skin, it settled into my bones, became part of me. I fell twice, got up twice. The second time, I couldn't feel William's blanket, and I panicked, patted him all over. Frantic, until I felt his little heart thumping fast as a sparrow's, and I sobbed. Just once. A big, ugly sound that the wind stole before it reached the ground. I reached his porch. I pounded on his door with fists I couldn't feel, and when he opened it, lamplight spilling out warm as a held breath, I said the words I thought I'd never say to any man alive. Save my baby. I'll do anything. Just, please. He looked at me. He looked at William, and he didn't say I told you so. Didn't say a single word about the months of returned crates and shut doors. He reached for his coat. He saddled the bay-gelding big animal, deep-chested, built for mountain work in the time it took me to stop shaking. Cinch tight, bridle fitted, saddlebags packed. He pulled his collar up, tugged his hat low, and looked at me one last time. Get him inside by the fire. Blankets in the chest by the bed. I'll be back by morning. He rode out into the blizzard like the dark was just another fence to cross. And I was left behind, in his house, holding my son by a fire I didn't build. wrapped in blankets I didn't buy. Sitting in a chair that held the warmth of a man I'd spent 8 months refusing. I didn't want to look at his home. Looking meant seeing. Seeing meant knowing who he was beyond the name I'd attached my stubbornness to. But the hours were long, and William's breathing was shallow, and my eyes wandered whether I wanted them to or not. A braided rug on the floor, worn soft in the paths between rooms. Someone had made that, or he'd chosen it with care, which amounted to the same thing. A clock on the mantel, ticking steady as a second heartbeat. Bookshelves built into the wall, not just almanacs and stock records. Tennyson beside a guide to animal husbandry. Poetry next to cattle management. This man had rooms in him I hadn't bothered to look into, and the evidence was right there on his shelves, patient as everything else about him. A wooden bowl on the kitchen table held 3 apples, browning at the stem, a pair of reading spectacles folded beside a lamp. Small things, human things. The kind of details that turn a stranger into a person whether you want them to or not. I pulled my eyes away, held William tighter. The clock ticked. His breathing hitched, steadied, hitched again. And in the silence between those small, ragged breaths, I did something I hadn't done since the day they brought Thomas home on that board. I talked to him, not to William, to Thomas. You'd be ashamed of me, I told him, in the quiet of my own head. You'd say, Jen, what in God's name are you doing? The man offered help, and you threw it back 3 times like some mule too proud to drink from a stranger's trough. And Thomas, or the Thomas I carried in my memory, said, You were never proving anything to me, Jen. You were proving it to yourself. And honey, the proof's done. Let it go. I looked down at my hands. Raw, cracked, wrapped around my son like they could hold his fever back by force. These hands had split wood, hauled water, dug a garden in frozen ground. Strong hands. But strength that refuses help isn't strength. It's just fear wearing work gloves. Somewhere in that blizzard, a man I'd treated like an enemy was fighting through waist-deep snow to save my child. Not because I'd earned it, not because I'd been kind or grateful or even civil, but because he saw something worth riding through a storm for. I pressed my lips to William's forehead and whispered, Hold on, baby. Just hold on. The hours crawled, snow against glass, dark against dark, and then so faint I thought I'd dreamed it hoofbeats, gray light, the kind of dawn that doesn't arrive so much as seep in, slow as water finding low ground. I was at the window, hadn't sat down in hours when I saw them. 2 horses, 2 riders. Beckett in front on the bay, slumped but still mounted. And behind him, Dr. Harlan on a sorrel mare. Medical bag strapped across his chest like a soldier's kit. They came through the door in a rush of cold air and exhaustion. Beckett's face was white, not pale. White. The blood just gone from it, and his hands shook so bad he couldn't work his own coat buttons. Dr. Harlan wasn't much better. Frost on his eyebrows, beard stiff as wire, fingers clumsy as he opened his bag. But his eyes were steady. Doctor's eyes. How long at this temperature? He asked, already pressing his palm to William's forehead. 3 days. I tried elderflower, steam, onion. You did right. not dismissive, just a fact. This one needs more than herbs can give. He worked over William on the kitchen table, and I stood with my fists clenched at my sides, watching another person's hands on my child, the cold circle of the stethoscope against William's small chest. The smell of the tincture bitter, sharp, like crushed roots and alcohol when he measured the dose. William cried when the medicine went in, that thin, reedy cry of a child too exhausted to really fight. And his fist found my finger and gripped it, and I held on, like that grip was the rope keeping both of us from falling. "I know, baby," I whispered. "I know it's bitter. Mama's here." Dr. Harlan listened to his chest again. Long pause. "Lung congestion. Fever's high, but it hasn't settled deep. Medicine will help break it. Now we watch." We watched. Beckett sat in the corner by the fire, silent as a stone fence. He'd ridden 40 miles round trip through a blizzard and hadn't said a word about it. Hadn't asked for thanks. Hadn't even taken off his frozen boots until I looked at him and said, "For mercy's sake, Beckett, sit down before you drop." He sat, didn't argue. He never did. Noon came and went. I spooned water into William's mouth, drop by drop, changed his compress, counted each breath like currency I couldn't afford to lose. Mid-afternoon. The light went gold and thin through the window. William's forehead was damp. Not dry anymore. Damp. And cooler. The furnace banking down. His eyes opened. Brown eyes. Thomas's eyes. Finding my face like I was the whole world. "Mama," he said. I pressed my face into the blanket beside his head and came apart. Quietly. The way mothers do, where the sound gets swallowed by fabric and relief so big it don't have a name in any language. In the next room, Beckett's voice, low and steady. "I'll cover the fee, Doc. Don't mention it to her." I opened my mouth, closed it, felt the refusal rise like a reflex, like a horse shying at a shadow. It's seen 100 times, and for once, I let it pass through me without acting on it. I didn't have a word for what replaced it, but it wasn't pride. William got better, day by day, in that warm house that wasn't mine. My boy came back to himself, color in his cheeks, the cough loosening, thinning, fading. He started reaching for things my braid, the edge of a blanket, a wooden spoon Beckett left on the table that William claimed as personal property and wouldn't surrender. Not even in sleep. I told myself we stayed because the cabin was too cold. Stove needed repair. Woodpile was gone. All true. All excuses. The real truth was I'd gotten scared of something I didn't expect. Not Beckett. Not owing him exactly. Though that gnawed at me. I was scared of comfort. Of waking warm without having to fight for it. Of sitting at a table with food I didn't ration. Of the way William laughed belly deep. Startled by joy when Beckett made shadow puppets on the wall by lamplight. A rabbit. A dog. A bird that flapped its wings. My son's laughter, filling a room that wasn't ours. And me standing in the doorway, feeling like a horse that's been ridden hard, its whole life, suddenly turned loose in open pasture. Not knowing whether to run or stay. Nighttime was the worst. Beckett slept in the barn, insisted. Wouldn't hear otherwise, and I lay in his guest bed with William curled against me, arguing with myself. "You don't need anyone," said the voice that sounded like armor. "You promised. You said you'd carry it alone. And how's that been working out?" said the voice that sounded like Thomas. Near killed your boy with your carrying. I thought about a morning, early in our marriage, Thomas standing at the stove, burning eggs. He couldn't cook worth a damn, but every Sunday he tried. I'd come up behind him and reached for the spatula, and he'd held it away from me, grinning, saying, "Let me do this one thing, Jen. You do everything else. Let me burn the eggs." And I'd laughed and let him, and we'd eaten scorched eggs with coffee, and it was the best meal I'd ever had. Not because of the food, because of the letting. I'd forgotten how to let. One night, the 4th or 5th, the days had blurred. I got up. William was sleeping deep, breathing clear. I put on my boots and coat and walked to the front door and put my hand on the latch. Cold air bit through the gap. Beyond it, the dark and the snow and my cabin waiting. Empty, but mine. I could go. Bundle William. Walk the half-mile. Light the stove. Stuff the cracks. Start over the way I'd been starting over every day since Thomas. Rebuild the walls. Become again the woman who sent everything back. My hand tightened on the latch. Behind me, William coughed. Soft. Just once. The ghost of the sickness passing through. I closed the door. I stood with my forehead pressed to the frame. Breathing. Just breathing. And I thought, was I running from Beckett or from the woman I might become if I stopped? I took my hand off the latch. It was the heaviest thing I'd ever set down. Morning. William was sitting up on his own, eating broth with clumsy hands, grabbing my braid and yanking with a strength that made me laugh, actually laugh. The sound startling in that quiet house, like a bird flying through a room with all the windows shut. Time to go home. The cabin needed tending, the mare needed feeding, and I'd leaned on Beckett Cole's kindness long enough. Every day I stayed was another thread tying me to something I hadn't agreed to. But before I left, I needed to know. I found him on the porch. Early light, thin and blue. The kind of cold morning where your breath hangs like it's deciding whether to stay or go. He was mending a harness hand steady, leather and buckle and the smell of saddle oil, and he looked up when I came out. Didn't speak. Waited, the way he always waited. I sat on the step beside him. Not close, but not far. And I asked the question that had been eating me since the night he rode into that blizzard. Why, rougher than I meant. I sent your flour back, your firewood, that blanket, and it was honestly the nicest blanket I ever touched. I've been cold to you. Beckett, mean, even, and you just kept coming. Why? He set down the harness, looked out at the valley snow shining gold and pink. The kind of morning that makes you forget how cruel the night was. He was quiet long enough that I thought maybe he wouldn't answer. Then, steady as everything else about him. Because strong women deserve someone patient enough to wait till they're ready. I sat with that, felt the words settle into my chest, not like a key turning, the way stories tell it. Slower, like snow melting off a roof in that first thaw, revealing the solid line of the beam underneath. Something that was always there. I just couldn't see it for the ice. I looked down at my hands on my knees. These hands, cracked and calloused, and strong hands that had split oak, delivered a calf in a thunderstorm, dug a grave for the man I loved. Hands that knew how to work. Hands that had something to give. I could have said thank you. Could have said I'm sorry. 100 things that would have been true and easy and enough. Instead, I said, I'll come check your livestock next week. Tuesday. If the weather holds. Thomas taught me animal husbandry. I know my way around a sick calf and a fence line that needs mending. You been doing for me all winter? Let me do something back. Something shifted in those gray eyes. Surprise. Maybe. Or recognition. Like he'd been waiting for exactly this and hadn't let himself expect it. I'd be much obliged, he said. No grand declaration. No sweeping moment. Just a woman on a porch step offering what she had, and a man wise enough to receive it. I didn't surrender my pride that morning. I felt it settle different in my body, not a wall at my back, but a spine beneath my skin. Straight and strong and able to bend. A spine's no good if it can't bend. Valentine's Day. I opened the recipe book. It had been in the bottom of the trunk since Thomas died underneath his Sunday shirt, and the quilt his mother made, and the wooden horse he'd carved for William. I'd buried it there the week after the funeral, because the sight of my grandmother's handwriting, that loopy, generous cursive. Margins full of notes like, more butter, always more butter, and Aunt Bess uses honey but she's wrong, made me feel something I couldn't afford. Tenderness. The kind that cracks you open if you let it. I let it. Page 14. Grandmother's blackberry pie. The recipe I'd made every summer since I was 9. The one Thomas swore was the reason he married me. I read it through twice, not because I'd forgotten. You don't forget what lives in your hands, but because I needed her with me. My grandmother, who smelled like flower and lavender, who told me once with blackberry juice on her apron, Geneva, the secret to a good pie ain't the recipe. It's who you're baking it for. I didn't have fresh blackberries in February, but I had preserves I'd put up last August, when the world was warm and Thomas was alive and the future didn't have teeth. I opened the jar and the smell rose sweet, dark, summer trapped in glass, and I stood there holding it, and I thought, I can open this. I can use what I saved. It don't mean letting go. It means letting in. William sat on a blanket on the floor, babbling opinions about everything, the way 2-year-olds do when they've come back from being sick and discovered the world still works. He had flour on his nose because I'd let him play with a handful, and he was smacking the floor with both palms, raising white clouds, laughing at his own genius. I rolled the dough, mixed the filling blackberries, sugar, a squeeze of hoarded lemon, a pinch of cinnamon my grandmother's recipe didn't call for, but Thomas always loved. Crimped the lattice the way she taught me, turning the plate in quarter turns, pressing with thumb and forefinger until the edges looked like rope. The cabin smelled like summer, like every kitchen I'd ever been safe in. I wrote the note on brown butcher paper. My handwriting isn't pretty, never was, but the words came steady. For the man brave enough to ride through my storm. I carried the pie across the valley. 1/2 mile. The same snow. The same path I'd walked in the dark with William burning against me. But softer now. Settling. And I wasn't desperate. Wasn't running. Just a woman carrying a pie to someone she cared about. The way women have done since the beginning of kitchens and kindness and all the ordinary things that hold the world together. Beckett was on his porch. Mending something. Always mending something. He looked up, looked at the pie, looked at the note tucked beneath the cloth. He read it slow, the way you read something you want to keep. Then he folded it and put it in his shirt pocket, over his heart, went inside and came back with 2 plates, a knife, 2 forks, cut 2 slices, handed me one. We sat on his porch in the thin February sun, The kind that doesn't warm you so much as remind you warmth is coming back. That it always comes back. William was on my lap, reaching for crumbs. Beckett was beside me, eating pie in the easy silence of a man who'd learned that some things don't need words. And I thought about pride, how it kept me warm when the stove went cold, how it kept me standing when grief tried to flatten me, how it was the only coat I had some nights. But pride don't cure fever. Don't bake a pie. Don't build a table big enough for two. I didn't know what Beckett and I were becoming. Love is a big word, and I wasn't ready might not be for a while yet. But I knew what this wasn't. It wasn't charity, wasn't pity, wasn't a woman folding because she was too weak to stand. It was a woman who'd carried the weight alone long enough to know she could, and wise enough, finally, to set some of it down. Not because she had to, because her hands were ready to hold something other than survival. Beckett looked at me and smiled, quiet as everything about him. Best pie I ever tasted. My grandmother's recipe, I said. Haven't made it since Thomas died. He nodded. He understood what that meant. He always understood the things I couldn't quite say. William grabbed a fistful of crust and shoved it in his mouth and laughed, and the sound of my son alive, whole, reaching for the world with both hands, that was the sound of spring coming. I could feel it in the mud beneath the snow, and for the first time since Thomas died, I wasn't afraid of what it might grow.